I'm getting goosebumps listening to both of them speak. Their words I'm going to keep with me for a very long time, honestly, for the rest of my life. I am now into, I think over 2 years with the Peace Action New York State. I started working with them when I was a junior in college. I'm past my undergrad now. And the theme for today's conversation is about grassroots organizing. And ever since I started working with Peace Action New York State, I've learned a lot about grassroots organizing. So many doors have opened up for me in this position. I've had the great privilege of doing some solidarity work in Nicaragua and visiting the labor co-ops there and the grassroots medical clinics. Recently, I was in Japan, where I partook in the annual Peace March, commemorating the anniversary of the atomic bombings on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we got to see real grassroots activism there from the organizers in Japan. And of course, all of last semester, I got to learn about grassroots activism through experience working with the students and organizing at Stony Brook. And today, I have the great privilege of learning from two incredible individuals who have dedicated their life to grassroots activism regarding peace and justice. And I'm really excited to learn about their experiences and their knowledge, and how we as young people especially can learn from them and improve in our own efforts. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's a pleasure to meet both of you guys. So with that said, I want to start off. I have a question for both of you. During her acceptance speech at the DNC, Vice President Kamala Harris ensured that she would maintain the U.S. military as, quote, the strongest and most lethal fighting force in the world. Former President Donald Trump boasted about spending $800 billion on the military during his acceptance speech at the RNC. So in a country where the political establishment, backed by the weapons industry lobbyists, is dogmatically committed to bolstering institutions of violence and war, I think it's safe to say that the cards are stacked against the peace movement. Under these conditions, what strategies should peace activists utilize for engaging to advance the cause for peace and human rights?
Yeah, that's an easy question. Yeah, good luck. Well, the first thing is educate, educate, educate. Organize, organize, organize. There you go. The degree of ignorance which allows our rulers to wage these wars, this 220 years of war, is part of the problem. We have to educate about Palestine. We have to educate about all of these wars that the United States is a part of. We're a part of this war now. The 80 bombs that were dropped on Beirut, destroying 4 entire apartment buildings, were American. Yeah. The U.S. Senator mentioned that, who's on the Armed Services Committee. He should know. Well, we have to educate. We have to educate that this lie of human shields, this disgraceful, deceitful, disgusting lie, means we can kill hundreds of civilians to kill whoever it is they want to kill. We have to educate about international military law, about the specificities of some of these struggles. And we have to organize. And I have to say, I mean, what I said before, I would repeat. The experience that I witnessed that was taking place on college campuses is proof that it can have an enormous effect. It's hard to maintain that momentum. I understand. People get discouraged. I'm discouraged. We're all discouraged. It can be depressing at times. But you have to remember, it took years to end the Vietnam War. It took years to end the Iraq War. It took years to end apartheid. And you just have to keep pushing. So I think that, organize, 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 take a long view, and understand that these things don't change overnight. That's very hard when you're 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. When you're my age, you realize it really takes a long time. Yeah. So that's the beginning of an answer.
I certainly agree with that. And let me go a step 2 further. I think in the educational piece of that work, which is critically important, and I don't care how old you are or how many years you've been doing this, there's still more to learn. It's a constant process. But we have to learn, and we have to learn and then figure out how to talk to other people about the deep connections. Why? Who is profiting from these wars? Somebody's making a whole lot of money, right? And where is that money going? It's not coming back in taxes that they're not paying, right? So we have to talk not only about the foreign policies and the war and the militarism, and who the hell talks about being proud of having the most lethal military might in the world. I mean, that's like way off. But we also have to talk about and learn more about the forces at play. You know, it was Dwight D. Eisenhower, no lefty radical, right, who taught us about, who first coined the term, the military-industrial complex. It is real. That's not a fantasy, and we have to really shine a light on that. And we have to name names, right? We have to name corporate names and individual names. And I think that's one piece of the work we need to do. The other piece that the peace movement needs to do is, and I know over many years we have tried, and sometimes the resistance to doing what I'm about to say comes from other players. But we have to continue to struggle to help people understand, and again, help us ourselves understand more deeply, how integral, how core the connections are in the fight for justice, the fight for freedom, for equity, dare I say, for liberation, is the struggle for peace. It's not just a rhetorical connection. It's practical reality that has to be exposed. And our job is to connect, not just theoretically the issues, but perhaps even more importantly, to connect the people that are struggling in those different arenas. And when we bring the people together, we begin to understand at a whole other level what is going on. And then we build the tactics and the very practical details of organizing together with those, that range of communities that have to be in the room, in the process with each other. And we have to break down the silos that unfortunately still exist in the broader social change movement in this country, let alone on a global scale.
Thank you guys so much. Those were incredibly insightful answers, so much for me to reflect on and think about further. You both talked a little bit about education and the role that plays in the peace movement. You know, a difficulty that I encountered trying to educate people, especially on Palestine, is that I just encounter tons of misconceptions and oftentimes just straight up racism from a lot of people who might be, anti-Palestinian or just highly in favor of Israel. And that kind of leads me to my next question for Professor Khalili. In your book, the 100 Years War on Palestine, you write extensively about how the policies of Western powers, especially the US, contribute to the colonization of Palestine. Do you believe that anti-Arab racism or some forms of Orientalism play a role in justifying these Western policies regarding Palestine? And if so, how can we as anti-racist activists in the West, how can we combat those kind of sentiments?
Yeah, the easy part of your question is the first part. Does racism contribute? Of course it does. I mean, you can go back to Lord Balfour. You can go back to any level of Western support for what was originally self-described as a colonizing movement. And the colonized were treated like the colonized have been treated everywhere across the earth by the colonizer. So that was and is certainly central to the problem. And it's sad to say it, but I think racism is a part of the problem today.
Absolutely.
I think the attitude towards certain lives is entirely different than the attitude towards other lives. Any child dying is obviously a tragedy, but somehow the deaths of thousands and thousands and thousands of children in Gaza doesn't merit the kind of sympathy that the deaths of Israeli children merits in the mass media, among our politicians. There can be no other explanation for that than rank, naked racism. And I think we have to call that out. And that's not an easy thing to do, because it's often embedded in the people that we have to interact with. I mean, I'm thinking of students having to deal with other students. I'm thinking of those of us who are faculty members dealing with other faculty members. But it's true in dealing with the general public. It's very, very hard to point out that what you're saying is racist. To say these people should have rights and these people should not. These people have to live penned up and these people not. These people can be moved by the hundreds of thousands. Today, they told the people of Bujur Barajni, Hadtahe, Leilaki, in a fourth neighborhood, in one of which my mother lived, in Beirut, that they have to leave because they're going to bomb it. And then they'll say if they didn't leave, well, we warned them. Hundreds of, 1 million people have already been forced to move in Lebanon, in addition to the 2 million people forced to move again. Now, that you can regard this with equanimity, as the mainstream media does, as that despicable rag the New York Times does, is only explicable in terms of racism. You force 80 or 100,000 Israelis from their homes on the border with Lebanon. You force 80 or 100,000 Israelis from their homes along the Gaza envelope, so-called. And this is a major tragedy, individuated in the New York Times, in the mass media. It is a tragedy. It is an individual tragedy. It deserves to be treated as such. But 8 times as many Palestinians in Gaza have been moved. In 1 week, 1 million people have been forced to leave their homes in Lebanon. I haven't seen much mention of that by a politician. The fact that our bombs are being dropped, as I speak, all over Lebanon, and obviously in Gaza, and nobody says anything about that. I have to say, it's not just racism, but there's a deep root of racism in the middle of it. And we have to call it out. It's a very hard thing to do.
Just to add to that too, it's not only that several million people in Gaza have been forced to leave their homes. They don't have homes to go back to. Right. What they have done to Gaza is it's unimaginable and unacceptable, and yet it happens, right? And I totally agree with you that the racial dynamic here, the racism that is so core to the ability to carry this out has to be named. Another thing that has to be named here is that the Israeli government is largely still claiming that all of this is in the name of safety for the Jewish people. First of all, this doesn't make any Jew anywhere in the world any safer. That's that needs to be confirmed. But to use the history of the Jewish people who have been on the receiving end of horrific treatment and genocide, to use that history, to corrupt that history as a way to defend the genocide of the Palestinian people is just simply not acceptable. You know, back in November, I think it was, when people started to call what the Israeli government was doing in Gaza a genocide, and other people saying, no, it's not a genocide, it's not a genocide. I looked it up. I thought I knew what the definition of genocide was, but I wanted to be sure. So I looked it up in the dictionary, and I looked it up on the UN website, and the UN format. It is, I was going to say a bad word, it is a genocide, right?
Genocide is a bad word. Go ahead and say it.
It's a fucking genocide. And again, the racism there and the racism of our own governments in not saying, okay, do whatever you want, but providing so much military power, right? These 2,000-pound bombs, and the money, and the money, and the money, and the diplomatic cover. It's just unconscionable, but on some level, not a total surprise, because the racism in this country, it's in the DNA of how this country is built. And if we as peace and anti-war activists don't speak out boldly and creatively against racism and challenge the core racism of so much of what life in this country is about, we're going to miss the mark, right? It is essential to any struggle for peace and for justice for people worldwide.
I think you guys have done a great job underscoring the importance of the anti-racist movement and how it's so inherently connected to the peace movement. That, you know, they both help each other, and that you need both in order to make progress. So on the topic of that intersection of movements, Leslie, I wanted to ask you a question. You know, you're involved in advocacy around various causes related to peace and justice, including the climate justice movement, the LGBTQ liberation movement, the feminist movement, the peace movement, the anti-capitalist movement, just to name a few. There you go. So how do you think all of these causes are connected to each other? Can you speak on the importance of inter-movement solidarity?
Okay, so I assume we have a few 6, 7 hours ahead of us. It is, you know, I think, let me just start by saying, I've seen in the last, I don't know how many years, maybe a decade or so, an incredible jump in the understanding and the consciousness about these issues being related, these struggles, these systems of oppression being intermingled, right, and impacting each other. So we understand, and especially among young people, we see this. I think there's an understanding. You know, people talk about racial capitalism, for instance, not just about capitalism, right? And I think people understand more and more about gender and the dynamic of gender and the role of misogyny. That is, in case anybody doesn't know, misogyny is women hating. Hating, that a key word there, which is having quite a rejuvenation in this country right now. And sexuality and a whole bunch of other critically important issues that define who we are. We are, as each of us as an individual, is complex, right? We're not one thing. I'm not only a woman, right? I'm a white woman. I'm not only a white woman, I'm an older white woman. I'm a lesbian, right? I'm a whole bunch of things, right? So it's not that hard, I think, to assume or to believe or to hope that we can talk about communities of people understanding the multi-layered nature of our lives. Because we live those lives every day. They're complex. And we have the theory, the theoretical, the analytical stuff is critically important. And we have to find a way to transfer that, to translate that into programmatic work. And that's where we fall short over and over again. And it's not only the peace movement that falls short, all other social movements fall short of making those connections on a very practical level. And again, as I said before, I don't have the plan how to make all that happen. No one person does. It's got to come from the bottom up. It's got to come from communities of people struggling with each other. And sometimes struggling with each other means struggling through our differences. And we have to not be afraid of having differences. It's okay to disagree. What's not okay is to beat each other up because we disagree.
President Khalidi, I wanted to rope you into this conversation too. The movement for Palestinian liberation has been undoubtedly diverse and intersectional. From, you were witness to the encampment at Columbia, one of the epicenters of the student movement last semester that inspired, me and my friends to start an encampment at Stony Brook too. How do you think that intersectionality and diversity strengthened the movement?
It didn't strengthen the movement, it was the movement. Because when the university shut down JVP and SJP, Jewish Voices for Peace, Students for Justice in Palestine, 80 other student groups, representing literally the entire intersectionality of everything we've talked about, stepped in their stead and formed Columbia University, apartheid the best. And they deserve all the applause you can give. And that was a representative of literally almost every single group on campus, every single cause on campus, and everything that Leslie has just talked about. Every single thing Leslie has just talked about. And other things, all of which people saw were related to liberation in Palestine, peace in the Middle East, and an end to these horrors that we're witnessing every day. So, I mean, it came from the bottom up, exactly as you said. Nobody planned this. They were all, there were MA students, there were undergraduates, there were a few PhD students. We, the faculty, had absolutely nothing to do with it. I'm not saying this so I'm not prosecuted. I'm saying it because it's the truth. The students did it on their own. And all the credit goes to them. And if they made mistakes, they made mistakes because you make mistakes when you're trying to do something, when you're involved in the action part of peace action. And that's normal and it's healthy. So I mean, I really think that was the secret to the success of what became a global movement. And it's why it recruited such a wide variety of people. And I saw that with, in my neighborhood, not just on campus. Union members would come up to me. People who had experienced British colonialism elsewhere would come up to me. And they'd say, we support what you guys are doing. Not because they were Palestinian, but because they saw that their struggle was related to the struggle in Palestine. So I think it's absolutely essential. In fact, if that's not the basis of what we do, there's no way to succeed on a narrow sectional chauvinistic basis. You can't possibly change the course of events in this country vis-a-vis Palestine. It's impossible. We haven't changed it yet. But we actually have public opinion on our side. Every single poll shows that the president's policies on Palestine are unpopular. Large majorities want arms sales to stop to Israel. Large majorities. Not just Democrats, all over the country. That means that this thing has worked on a popular level. The problem, of course, is the elites, the people who are making a fortune on arms, the people who own the universities. I mean, it's been revealed, if anybody didn't realize it, that faculty and students count for absolutely nothing in universities. 2/3 of the arts and science faculty voted no confidence in the president. She stuck around and messed things up for another 6 months before she finally resigned. Overwhelming majorities of students voted for divestment in 2020. Columbia and Barnard and many other campuses. Did the boards of trustees of any of those universities pay attention? Of course not. So the people who own these universities, and the people who own the mass media, and who own our politicians, I would call them prostitutes, but I don't want to dishonor sex workers.
We are coming to the end. I wish we could have this conversation all night long. I have so much to say. But we're coming to the end here. So I didn't want to leave without asking you guys one more question. When I was in Japan for the World Conference Against Nuclear Weapons, I was part of a youth forum where we took questions from young Japanese students. And the last question that I got there was a Japanese student asking me and the other panelists, how do we deal with despair? Like despair is an inevitable experience when you're advocating for human rights. Because we live in a world where people don't care about human rights, and that's something we have to come to terms with and learn to combat. So I wanted to ask you guys to pass on that same question. In your line of work, what are some moments where you come across despair, and how do you overcome?
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that I think gets forgotten sometimes in our own movement history. One of the contributions of the earlier stages of this second wave of feminism was that we shouldn't deny our feelings, whether we are happy or we are sad, whether we are angry, whether we are joyous, whether we are feeling despair. All the feelings are part, again, of who we are. And connecting to other human beings means that we have to honor their feelings also. Again, we don't have to have the same feelings, but we do need to recognize and encourage people to be in touch with their feelings and to express them. The challenge is to express them in a useful way, in a creative way, in a way that helps promote not only connections between people, but actually changes in policy, changes in reality. We want to change reality. And so if we deny our own feelings, we're going to miss the boat, right? We're going to be totally in our heads and the theory. And the theory can start to go in circles with the theory. I'm all for theory, please don't get me wrong. I'm all for theory and analytical work, and we need to do that more rigorously. But if we only do that, then we're missing the boat again in that human connection, which is vital to any social change movement. I think it's vital to any human experience, actually. So I feel despair. And I feel it more maybe because of how long I've been doing this. And there have been moments in my own life, and many of you in the room, I think, probably share this, where we actually made a difference. We didn't change the world, but we helped move the needle. We helped make some people's lives a little bit better, and some people's lives a whole lot better, right? There was a time when I couldn't get up in a crowd like this and say, I'm a lesbian, and everybody would applaud. So we're making a difference. In the last 10 years or so, in the last 9 years, so I actually point to a particular moment when Donald Trump, I know a lot of people don't like to say his name, but we should name names. When Donald Trump rode down that escalator, right, and announced that he was running for president based on a total assault on Mexicans who were trying to come to this country because NAFTA and other U.S. policies totally undermined their own life and their livelihoods, right? That's why there was such an increase. That's one of the reasons why there was such an increase in migration from Mexico. To say nothing of people in Guatemala who were facing, or Honduras, I'm sorry, I don't remember which one, maybe both now. The horrible impacts of the climate crisis, with their farms were failing, right? So they also had to leave, right? So Donald Trump took us to a new era, right? And we haven't gotten out of that yet. We are far from getting out of it, and I'm sorry to announce here, it could get worse. And that is a dilemma that we face, right? How do we deal with that in a way that allows us to tap into our despair about the moment and use that energy that we find there to say not only no to Donald Trump and Project 2025 and that whole thing, but how do we tap into all that to energize us to make sure that if Harris is in the White House, that there's no honeymoon period. There's no, let's see what she does and what her administration does. We have got to be all out on every single issue issues. Why does this country still not have a national health care plan? That's what you all have a list, right? So that's the bottom line to question of despair is, yes, we have it, right? I bet everybody in this room at some point in the day feels some despair. But let's not wallow in that, right? Let's acknowledge it and move on and build and build and build.
Basically, I'll leave you with the honor of leaving us with some last thoughts on how to remain hopeful and overcome despair.
Yeah, well, I think Leslie sort of said it all. There's not much I can add to that. I go back to what I said earlier, which is you have to realize that the trajectory is always a long one. If you want to do anything worthwhile, the trajectory is a long one. You know, changing racist structures, that's going to happen like that. And inconceivable. Changing some of the things that you just mentioned changed. That took decades and decades and decades of work. And so that's the first thing. You can't despair because in the third or the second or the fifth decade of that work, you still haven't achieved what you want to achieve. And you have to take solace from the occasional victory. I mean, today, I was just told by my friend Michael Smith that the International Criminal Court has issued warrants for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu. Small victory. That means that him and his war criminal secretary, Minister of War, I won't call him Minister of Defense, he's Minister of War, cannot go to a number of countries. Excellent. That's a small victory. People are dying as we speak as they bomb Lebanon and Gaza. But the fact that the world considers them war criminals and that there's a warrant for their arrest is something we should take comfort in. We are on the right side of history. Sooner or later, those structures of iniquity, of injustice, of dispossession have to come tumbling down. And it's not true that people don't believe in human rights. It's not true that international humanitarian law is not respected. It's not respected by the powers, by the United States government. But ordinary people understand those things. And it's partly our job to make sure that it's front and center. Every American politician is breaking the Leahy law. Those weapons, which are horrible things, by a U.S. law have to be used for self-defense. Killing 42,000 people is self-defense. It's grotesque. Every time they repeat automaton-like, Israel has the right to defend itself, what they're doing is defending themselves. Because otherwise they should be prosecuted for violating U.S. law. Well, they don't. Keep things like that in the front of people's minds. Because ordinary people actually already oppose this war by overwhelming majorities. Not just here, in the world. All the big countries, everybody in all of the biggest countries in the world is against this war. And that's actually beginning to be the case even in the Western metropole for this Israeli project. In Germany, in Britain, in France, and in this country, public opinion is shifting in the right direction. That hasn't changed one government's position. 4 governments have slightly restricted their weapons sales to Israel. Slightly. No big effect. Canada, Netherlands, Great Britain, and Germany. Not enough. But it's a sign of the fact that the times actually are changing. And we have to take solace from these little shifts in the right direction, even as the mass slaughter continues, even as these arms industry, these huge industries that manufacture arms are making obscene profits. We have to keep the victories in mind.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rex, for moderating this conversation. I wish we could go longer, but we're already slightly over time. So thank you, everyone, for hanging in with us. And thank you again to Rex, to Professor Khalidi, to Leslie for your incredible work and for sharing some of those thoughts with us here on stage.
Thank you.
have you for just a couple minutes longer. This is a fundraiser. So next, I'd like to invite our Peace Action Fund of New York State board member, Joanne Robinson, to the stage to give some logistics for getting upstairs to our wonderful reception. We've got food and drink for those of you here in person, and we're almost there, so please bear with us. Great, and here comes Joanne. So I'll pass it to her. Joanne, please.